Hi, I'm John Stevens.
This is Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.
This is Pod Have Mercy.
Are we recording? Can we just go straight into this?
I'm rolling.
Yeah.
I'm rolling.
Yeah, so my birthday was great. It started with church, preaching, and then I had a baptism of an infant in the parlor, which was great. And we had a bunch of families zooming in from all over.
It's great.
And then I went home for a few minutes, and then we had dinner with some folks that are moving away, that are a special part of our community.
Yeah.
We had this great concert with like
That was crazy.
4,000 or
concert.
5,000 people online with Mark Lowry and our Cam Cody and James Kelly. And then I got an email at the end of the night from a lady who said
Little birthday
basically, yeah, it was nice. It was top it all off. It was like the cherry on the end of a very great and busy day. And you're at home, you're settling in, and you're having a drink, and
Kinda
you're like, this has
vulnerable.
been a good day,
Yeah.
Turned 51, and she says, do you even know Jesus? And I hope your brother, who's a Baptist, I hope he knows how to lead his people to Jesus. I was like, wow. I mean, I only spoke like 2 minutes in the 2-hour program, but apparently
That was a lot.
this woman who's never met me, doesn't go to our church, doesn't live in this city, and it feels confident.
Because you didn't do an altar call.
I didn't
some
tell
form
people
of-
how to be saved. Didn't tell people
The Romans
about it.
Road, you didn't lay that thing out.
Yeah, I kind of thought the whole night was about Jesus, but maybe I missed something.
Well, obviously, you weren't.
No, it obviously was not. So there was like an hour and 50 minutes of Jesus singing, and then I jumped up. Satan? Who's that guy? The Satan?
Well, John Stevens.
Well,
How
John
special.
Stevens.
Well.
Aren't you? Who could you be?
Special.
Satan? Apparently I'm Satan, so. Yeah, it comes with the territory. If you don't give people... Well, the interesting thing to me, though, is a lot of kind of what we just felt in our cultures is everybody... on this particular situation, I get she has probably her way of thinking how faith's supposed to be
one
lived
chance
out.
at it, man.
It's not about love. It's not about that. It's about, man, you better... Now, I will tell you there were about 160 people in the sanctuary and about 4,000 online, and every one of them, I followed the little live chat, and I was in the room. Trust me, it was a lot of Baptists, which I love, and there was a lot of amening and I looked around the room. Everybody's singing the songs. Now, they're singing old hymns.
Old hymns. This is
So I'm looking around, and my thought is, there might be some people in here who are not Christian, but it's not because they don't know who Jesus is. I mean, you saying? I mean,
I'm getting you.
it's kind of like Gandhi said. I almost
Would have
was this
become a
close. I
Christian.
would have become a Christian if I could have actually found Christians who lived the teachings of Jesus.
Right.
So, I don't know. A little more love, a little more kindness goes a long way.
Yeah. I grew up in a culture that was similar to that. That was like almost it was about saying the words, and once you said the words, you could move on to the next person. It was like if they knew about Jesus, hey, it's not my responsibility anymore.
Then you can cash out with
Right.
your eggs and your bacon and your cheese and your sodas at the grocery store line.
Yes. Thank you.
Once you know if they know Jesus, then it's
Right.
like, okay, now I can.
Everything
actually
was a
check out.
divine encounter.
Yeah.
Of getting people out of hell and into heaven. And,
Well, when I was growing up, we did these skits where, when you were in youth camp, or I was a youth leader and youth director, and it was like a car accident, right? You didn't tell your friends. It was always the car accident, and they're all going to heaven, and it was like the hidden Christian who didn't share his faith with other people, and they're all going before heaven, and they're like, "Why didn't you tell me?" As they're being dragged to hell, and I'm thinking that was really a great environment for 13-year-olds, Scare the living crap out of them.
churches do that now at Halloween with those kinds of things, right? So they'll set up those.
They have the apocalyptic haunted house.
Yeah, or the scenarios of like the car accident, or the woman that's gets pregnant or whatever. And it's
so
all
you pay $20, you go through the thing, and at the end you have to sit for an hour and listen to the guy preach. Yeah. No, I've been to those. I've taken youth groups to those before, and I'm not judging. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think it's just interesting that when the whole night is devoted to these hymns, and it's like you didn't say the right
something
words
about that name, and you didn't say it enough.
I didn't say the right words. So we're in the season of Lent. And one of the things I've discovered in the season, Lent's the time, that season before Easter, those 40 days, not counting Sundays, when you are to engage in a process of self-denial, fasting, induced suffering, separation, so that you can prepare yourself to fully experience Easter. And
how's that working out, John?
My whole thing is like, we've been in Lenten fast since March 14th of 2020. We're getting on a year.
Yeah, crazy.
When everything shut down. They just started doing it. If you watch the news, the year anniversary of, like, they stopped the basketball games and they stopped the Players' Championship at the golf course. They just stopped.
And the
pulled
rodeo.
Everybody. And then I think it was March the 13th. I think it was a Thursday. I was having a meeting with some pastors and our bishop. And it was that night that we were on a call with Methodist. And it was then when the emergency declaration went out by, I can't remember, the governor or the president. The next day it was the president. The next day it was all this. And we had canceled by Friday. We had canceled church on Sunday. That's how quick it happened. It was surreal. Yeah, so I would say we have been living in a season of self-denial and fasting and isolation for a year. So I guess, how do you engage in a season of fasting and self-denial when your whole life has been fasting and self-denial? Fasting, I don't know about fasting, but self-denial, isolation, alienation.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question, except for the fact that it's kind of hard for me to encourage people to give stuff up for Lent when they're just now reintegrating into society.
Right. Yeah.
For the first time. I went to see my mother last week.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
How was that?
Oh, it was great.
I saw pictures. It looked like it was fun.
She's had her 2 vaccines. She's in the clear. And so I told her, I said, do you want to go out to eat dinner at this restaurant? We'll kind of be at our own table, and my brother will go. And she's like, I don't know. And I was like, you've had your virus. I get you still want to be safe. I encourage people to be safe. And I said, but, what she said was she was so scared because for a year, she's just been living in anxiety and fear.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, how do you just turn that off?
Right.
It made sense to me.
Absolutely.
It's like, okay. I was like, you don't think about the psychological trauma of being told all of this.
Right.
And so we went to dinner, and at first you could tell she's really nervous. Whatever. And then, vodka and tonic later, she's like, I love dinner. This is so good. I'm free. We're out having dinner. This is so much fun. I'm with people.
That's so
It was great. I was like, okay, now we're starting to knock the rust off of actually getting out and being with other people, which is good. I think that's really and that makes me think this year we're talking about that movement from captivity to freedom. We're seeing that happen for a lot of us as people are being vaccinated. Now they're thinking, man, I could start living a little bit more free.
Right.
And when we think about captivity, if you were going to do like word associations, what do you think of when you think about captivity?
Wow. I think about being trapped. I think about being isolated. I think about being not being able to move or have freedom of movement. I think about being sequestered and locked down. All those, captive. I mean, it's you're captivated.
Yeah.
You're held in a place that you can't move, and you don't have agency over movement in your life.
You know a lot about addiction.
I do, John.
Well, say that. Why is everyone so personal? Everybody's so sensitive.
No, I'm not.
I say it. You got a freaking PhD in
I do in addiction. I do.
Why would that be offensive?
No, I'm not offended.
I mean, I do get how it sounds. It's like
you know something about addiction.
Wow,
I guess.
You know all about addiction. But one of the things, it's like we're held captive to all these things. We think about physical captivity or bondage, like the Israelites in slavery, or slavery in human history.
Right.
But think about like psychological, emotional, spiritual, relational. And addiction, think about captive to addictions. And people think that's just like drugs or alcohol. But it's more than that. We're addicted to a lot of things. We're addicted to ways of thinking.
Yep.
We're addicted to patterns of behavior. We're addicted to feelings that are pleasant or unpleasant, even addicted to relationships with people. This guy, Gerald May, wrote that addiction is any compulsive habitual behavior that limits the freedom of human desire.
Yeah. May's great. That comes out of a book called Addiction and Grace. And he goes on to talk about, I don't know if it's in that book, but that he goes on to talk and uses some of the Ignatian stuff where addiction is a disordered attachment. It's an attachment to stuff that actually ends up binding us. And which I think is a really great insight.
So do you see that, like the things that have been going on in the world lately? You think about tribal associations and political and ideological. It seems like to me, there's addictive behavior rooted in some of that. Don't you think?
Yes, because most of those things are about our impulse for safety, our impulse to not feel pain, our impulse to create something to where we're secure. And at the impulse, addiction is, there's something right about it, right? They're saying that there's a model that Dr. Kitty Harris is going to offer out, which is called the process model of addiction, where all addiction starts at a place of pain. And some of this is like pre-verbal stuff. It's unconscious. It's like I feel pain at a place and I don't want to feel that. And so our behaviors kind of gather around that to protect us, right? And we get involved in behaviors and actions and attitudes that then grow much like a skin would grow over something, to where then they become problematic, but we're so attached to that way of being, we can't break out of it. It takes something from the outside often to help us to see what those behaviors are doing to us.
Do you think, so you've worked a lot with people in recovery who work in the program on addictions like drugs and alcohol or behaviors that are defeating. But what about like ideologies and belief systems and like even like I think politics? I mean, don't you think, I'm just asking, I think there is that, but it's like an addictive aspect to society with personalities and leaders and parties and just mentality that seems to me to be unhealthy. It's almost like the whole country needs to be working the program.
Right.
And what's the first step?
Is acknowledgement that you got a problem.
I don't think that anybody thinks they have a problem.
Yeah, I'm powerless.
And that's what he talks about. It's like, what happens is we fall in these patterns of returning to these same things, same beliefs, same experiences. We normalize our captivity.
Yes.
That's just the way it is. That's just who I am. This is the reality.
Yeah.
And I have no other way of thinking about being different.
Right. That's where there's a whole psychological body of work that says that captivity, once it gets internalized, you don't need a captor anymore, because you've already internalized the captivity, if that makes sense. So you don't need then a captor to keep you in chains, because it's this learned behavior that you walk around inside of your skin with, which I think is super interesting, right? And so the addiction doesn't just show up then anymore in, say, alcohol or whatever, the thousands of behaviors that we're talking about. It's internalized, and it can then be a process by which we approach everything. How we make decisions to either take risks or not take risks, who is in our group. All these things come out of that process that we've internalized, which is about how do we mitigate risk and pain, how do we protect ourselves, and how do we keep other people away from us that we think are threats, right?
It's almost like we kind of make a happy place, our prison cell, our captivity becomes for us a narrative. It's like in the Old Testament when the Hebrews were taken out and they began to go in the wilderness and God was teaching them a new way of being. They wanted to go back.
Right.
To
Stockholm
captivity.
Syndrome, right?
Yeah.
That's what that is. You fall in love with your captors. Why? Because they provide you with so much security. You don't have to make decisions, right? We live what Charles Taylor says, that we live in this age of anxiety, because we have all these options and we're trying to figure out who we are in these options. And so the anxiety is at this all-time high. You put pandemic on top of that, and you put loss of job on top of that, and you put all these kids on top of whatever those things are on top of that. Our anxiety is just through the roof. And if you can have anyone that would mitigate that, right? That's why we give our power over to things that end up not leading us to freedom, right? But leading us into a way of security.
I don't know. It seems like, I don't know, to me, our whole society now is in some vicious, addicted loop. We're locked into captivity.
Yeah.
And it's almost like everyone's okay with that.
Yeah.
They double down.
Yeah.
It's like this, person who emails me tells me
you don't know
Jesus and, or I don't do it the right way.
Yeah.
And try to send a pastoral admonishment, not mean, just you might want to think about before you send this. Maybe we don't, whatever. Yeah. And how about the fruit of the Spirit and whatever else? And no, let's double down. Yeah. I mean, so you realize you can't even engage in a dialogue.
No.
Because there is no sense of open humility for that. It's retreated even more in. And then I become the enemy.
Right.
I'm the one who's self-righteous and defensive and everything else.
Right.
For them. Because that then makes their reality unthreatened.
Right.
They're right. They're always going to be right.
Right.
Doesn't matter.
That's you've talked about like tribalism and those kinds of things, which I find to be really a helpful concept, and that's why I think that Christianity is such this this antidote to tribalism, because if every tribe and every nation is gathered around Jesus at some point in history, if that's where that's moving towards, then Christianity at its best is building bridges between those warring factions to say, actually, Cain and or Abraham and Esau, you're brothers. You don't have to be enemies. Cain and Abel, you're brothers. You don't have to be enemies, right? And like you had mentioned, we don't have to be involved in manipulation in order to get our way. But it does require humility. To break any addiction requires humility, right? And that's what a lot of times people, myself included, find really difficult to take that first step, is to say, wow, I've got a problem.
And so then the move, there's this three step, there's these three places that Scripture shows us. We see it whether it's in the archetype of Exodus from the Hebrews, then you have to go through a period of wilderness. There is no freedom without wilderness. Yeah, but to get to freedom is from captivity to freedom. Wilderness is the transition place. So if you look at Luke 15, the story of the prodigal son, same thing. There's captivity. Even though he's at home, he's really free. That's actually, to me, a really new way of spinning it, because everyone knows the Hebrews are slaves. If you understand slave, I don't have any freedom. But the son is not enslaved. Right. The son is totally free. He's just living in his own prison again.
Yes.
His own perception. So the prison is in his home, whatever, that he just feels, I'm not the older brother or whatever. Right. And so he leaves the house. That's his captivity. He goes into the far country, the wilderness. And it's only in the wilderness that we can find, the way I've been saying it is, it's the wilderness that lays us bare. The resources are not there. It's a place where we're out of control when we're there. We have fewer resources when we're there. We are not the initiators in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. We are responders in the wilderness. It is the wilderness is way more active playing on us than we are playing on it. Yes. We are at its mercy.
That's great.
And so we have to respond. We are in submission to the wilderness. And I think in a spiritual state, whether it's emotional, psychological, or whatever, the wilderness is a dangerous, wild place. Where then we are then confronted. We're broken open, and we are confronted. It's probably more than two, but I think, okay, we can now go back to captivity, or we can forge on to freedom. But that's going to take a critical moment of decision of how are you going to do. So whatever it is you're captive to, and whatever the freedom would be. So we've talked about loneliness, right? And the freedom would be wholeness. Mm-hmm. Well, it's changing how you look at loneliness, not loneliness all focused on you, self-pity, self-defeating, but it's solitude, which is a spiritual practice where God is now moved to the center. And so what do you think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? He's alone, but he's not lonely.
Right.
And everything now changes about his center.
Yeah.
Or whether it's alienation, where that's a communal loneliness, isolation. And the freedom is community, not tribalism. But in the wilderness, then we have a choice. Do I double down and enter into that dark twin of community, which is tribalism, where I'm only going to be banded together with people who hate the same people I do?
Right.
Or am I going to forge forward into something that's going to be relationships rooted in mutual love and affection, rooted in kindness, rooted in compassion, rooted in humility, rooted in mutual humanity, and getting past all the superficial stuff of my race, of what I look like, my socioeconomic status, my politics, my ideology, go all the way down to the core essence of who you are, created in God's image, that humanity connection.
That's brilliant. Yeah. What I hear you saying is in the wilderness.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Sorry, would you speak up? Siri can't hear you. Go ahead. You just need to speak up, apparently.
That lady on your wrist.
You can't say anything that sounds like Siri. Hey, Siri, be quiet.
Down, girl. What I love about that is it seems like what you're saying is that in the wilderness, then all those things that we attempt to use to secure ourselves in our own world, in the wilderness don't work. And then we have a choice either to double down on them and go back to captivity. But the way forward, at least Carl Jung says this, and this is second half of life stuff. This is like, are you going to grow or are you going to stay stagnant and stay where you're at? And the growth always comes out of that risk place. And I think another word for risk is faith. Well, you take the risk of what you don't know. Go to the land that I'll show you, right? Because I know the way behind me. I know how to get back to captivity. You know, those behaviors are in me. But to go forward, I don't know. I don't know the way, right? Mm-hmm. And so it causes us to have to live by what the just will live by faith. Those folks that are trying to figure it out are living by this risk forward. We don't know the way. So I can't demonize you. I can't demonize myself. I have to say, I surrender to you, God. Would you show me the way forward?
All right, so let's move this from a spiritual, or every conversation to me is a spiritual conversation, but let's move it over into the realm or the world of change management and business practice or whatever. So one of the things they talk about, whether it's in psychologically in sort of family systems or if it's organizational culture and organizational systems, is that change only happens, again, just like captivity, wilderness, freedom, which is the biblical model. To me, it's like all the organizational culture and leadership systems, it all comes out of Scripture, whether you like it or not. And so it starts out, it's like, how does change happen? Well, the first thing that has to happen is there has to be disequilibrium entered into the system. So everyone desires homeostasis, just like in your inner ear. You stand up, you don't realize how hard your body is actually working to keep everything steady. And if you've ever had vertigo, you know that as soon as that little fluid, that's like, dude, so tiny in your ear, if it's off just a little bit,
it'll drop you.
You can't stand up straight, right? You can't walk in a straight line. Vodka tonics will do that too, but so we always are fighting to maintain this homeostasis.
Yes.
But in order to change, that has to be disrupted enough. It has to be tilted enough.
Yes.
Right? In order for, and they call it introduction of survival anxiety. And enough anxiety has to be introduced to the system to tip the homeostasis. It's called disequilibrium, right? And then what happens is you enter into that wilderness stage. Right?
Okay, hang on. Okay. So that's what I would lay over in my language would say, those are the disordered attachments that you have to have distance on. Right? Those are the attachments that the wilderness says, wait, this isn't working the way I want it to work. Right? Is that what I'm hearing you saying?
So
that's
I think I liken it, the captivity is that place where there's the cross between what they call, you have to be unfrozen. They call it unfreezing. The system or the person has to be shaken. So when I think of my friend years ago who, needed to stop drinking. And I sent him to, I think I told you this story. I sent him to a friend of mine who was a big leader in recovery. And I said, why don't you go see this guy? He can help you. And the guy calls me back and he goes, I saw your friend, that you're the leader of recovery and everything. And he told me to go drink beer. And I'm like, this guy's an alcoholic. And I called the dude and I was like, I called the guy that's the sponsor mentor. I said, dude, what the heck, man? And he's like, he's not ready. He's not there yet. He ain't hit the bottom. And so, I always talk about hitting the bottom. It's like
managing it.
He's not ready. He's so there's not ready things. I was like, dude, you don't tell him to go drink. I mean, I didn't get it. I don't understand, but that's never been my thing. Yeah. But what happened to my friend ultimately when he did reach that spot and he had to go to treatment, right? That's where the unfreezing happens. That's where he's broken open.
Yes.
All right. And then once you step out of captivity into wilderness, or once you step out of unfreezing, once you're unfrozen, once disequilibrium now is in your place, everything is chaotic. You're in wilderness. You're in the wild. You don't have the resources, right? And in organizational culture or in personal psychology, they say what happens now is there has to be a cognitive restructuring process.
Yes.
This is where the learning takes place.
Great.
And you have a choice, right? You can choose to have your knowledge restructured and think differently. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine, people who have gone through recovery, they get to a place on the other side. Like I've never been able to understand how someone who has been able to drink or drank their whole life, and then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, I don't need to drink. I don't need to touch it. Some of them I've heard go, I can't touch it because if I do, it'll kill me.
Right.
And others just like, no interest anymore. I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big shift if that's been a big part of your life.
Massive.
Yeah.
Massive shift. I mean, I think that bears witness to...
Because how much of our society is rooted around cocktails and drinking and...
Yeah. Or any behavior that we're trying to mitigate pain and to create security in our lives that actually is hurting us, is not doing that, right? And so when we give those things up, I love that. The wilderness is a wild place. It is unstructured. We are not in control anymore. And it's absolutely necessary so that these new learning behaviors can happen, right? And I think also in that place is when we're broken open to another reality that exists beyond the one that I've constructed out of my own fear or security-driven measures, which is God's reality, right? That humankind doesn't live by bread alone. Oh.
That's cognitive restructuring.
Right. You've got food
that's learning to trust in God for your daily bread versus dependent upon the slaveholders to bring you the flesh pots or the leeks and the onions.
Or it's all up to me.
And the bread ovens. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so what happens is everybody does it different ways. Like I've known people in recovery who say, I don't drink that stuff. It's poison. Something has happened in them that becomes, and some of them is just like, it doesn't do good things for me. It turns me into a bad person.
I've got an allergy.
Or whatever, or I'm allergic. I mean, there's any number of things that they have processed and they've restructured the way they view it. Their reality has changed.
Yeah.
And I think the same is true for us, is that we have to go through this level to learn that we can live into this new future. So they also say in change theory, it's like you have to reduce the learning anxiety. Because one of the things that I guess an alcoholic or anyone else that has an addiction, political addiction, all right, is like, I can't envision myself living into this reality that you're drawing for me.
Right.
I don't see me living in that.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Right.
And if you can't see yourself living into that, you'll never cross over. One of the reasons why you have so many little churches over there filled with older members that have been there their whole lives, and they're dying and they're dying and they're dying and they're dying, and they finally said, tell us, what do we need to do to reach young people? What do we do? Need to keep going? And it's like, all right, well, here's what you got to do. You got to change some ways you do it. It doesn't mean you have to stop, but maybe you need to change your music. Oh, no, we're not changing our music. Well, maybe you might want to get a younger pastor.
We can't do that.
Or whatever it is. Maybe you might want to not say that this is your seat, and if anyone sits in it, they have to move, like when they come to church or whatever. And finally, when you go through these, I've done this before in consulting with churches, and we start talking about, well, let's examine your community. You're an old white congregation. You live in an African-American community, and why don't we reach the people that you live around? Well, I don't know about that. So they finally get to a point where they cannot envision themselves living into that reality.
Yes.
And so once they get to that point, that's when you get the mentality of, well, we're just going to ride it out, last one out, turn out the lights.
Right.
We're okay with dying.
Right.
That's when people get okay with death.
Yeah.
They resign.
The restructuring that you're talking about, that Greek theological word metanoia, that whole shift, the paradigm shift that like Thomas had when Jesus kind of walks through the wall and is there, and he's like, oh, my Lord and my God, like I didn't get it, but I'm getting it now. Like that shift is super important. Because if we don't have that shift, that cognitive shift of learning and those kinds of things, then when the pain and the anxiety returns, which it always will, we'll relapse back into captivity, thinking that that's the security point, right? And so I think the idea of the bottom or those things being broken open like you're talking about is so that when the anxiety gets high, we realize, wait, I can reach back out for that. That's a mirage, though. That's going to take me backwards. Although it feels like it'll save me, it's going to take me backwards. I've had to learn, I'm saying collectively, we have to learn how to live into faith, how to live into the ambiguity and vulnerability, all those things that
Speaking of Thomas, did you see the little cartoon of the Zoom with all the disciples and Jesus? And their cameras are on, but Jesus is off. It just says Jesus. And Thomas says, I will not believe that he's here until he turns his camera on. So then you talk about, okay, you get to the wilderness and you make the choice. You either go back to captivity or even to freedom. And freedom's going to require change, metanoia, moving in a new direction. Yeah. That's hard for us. It's hard for everybody to experience that, integrate this new way of living. But that's when you reach freedom. And that's when, so unfreezing, restructuring, and then what they call it is refreezing. Now what you're doing is you're forming structure, solidity around the new way of being. Right. This is the new creation, right? This is the new person. This is the new you that you celebrate on a regular basis. And so freedom, if you're unwilling to leave things, beliefs, attitudes, postures that keep you confined, what's really interesting is everybody I know will tell you they want freedom, but they're not willing to leave behind these things that constrain them in their captivity. Right. You cannot remain captive to those old things and be free.
No, you cannot.
It doesn't work that way.
You can camouflage the heck out of your life.
And you cannot be comfortable in your captivity and be free at the same time.
Come on.
So the other thing that I would say to people in our culture is freedom from a biblical, spiritual, scriptural sense has nothing to do with your individual liberty. I can do what I want simply from an individual perspective, cut off from other people. Freedom from this perspective is not personal freedom. Doesn't mean you have the right to do any damn thing you want to do and believe any damn thing you want to believe. That's not what freedom is. Freedom from a scriptural perspective is not that sort of perverted, immature sense of what it means to be freedom. It means that you are no longer limited to these attachments that these powers and these possessions and these relationships have over you. You're not attached to where these other people or yourself or these possessions are the center of your life and give meaning to your life. That you can be free from all of them at any moment, people, things, outcomes, ideas, politics, so that at any moment you can respond to the invitation and the movement of God. That's where you recenter things.
Amen.
That's freedom.
Come on.
And so if you think about the life of Jesus being free, what did that freedom look like? Submission to death on a cross. I always love it when people come and go, let me just tell you, preacher, I'm not coming back to church with you, wear mask and make me wear those masks. I ain't coming back till you have that Bible. Don't even send me something on that Bible study. I'm not doing it on a Zoom, whatever. I'm like, you know what, dude? Don't give me that. Yeah. Just, I'm going to give you some biblical language. Take up your cross, dude. Yeah. I know it's hard. I know it's tough. But it's like this whole confusion of, I'm not free. You're not letting me be free. I've seen this from pastors all over the United States. People have left their churches because they didn't open up early enough for them. They have left their churches because their churches require them to wear masks in a worship service. Yeah. They just left. Now, you'd ask me, what kind of freedom is that? You got the freedom to do whatever the hell you want to do. You can go to any church you want to, right? But how much of that is real, true freedom that leads itself to respond to the invitation, the movement of God in that moment, the kind of freedom, non-attachment experienced that we see embodied in Jesus when he looks at his disciples and says, take up your cross and follow me.
Yeah. I would say this too, is that freedom is not an individual exercise or journey. It can only happen in relationship and in community. And I think that's one of the things that we miss in our hyper-individualistic Locke Rousseau kind of world of hyper-rationality, is that we don't realize is that the whole biblical mandate is pointing us back to community, back to relationship, right? So who I meet in the desert is myself, but I am restructured through new relationships, through a new community, right? So it's not as if I go into the wilderness as an individual and I emerge as an individual. I may go in as an individual, isolated, lonely, and afraid, but I'm always let out through other people that I have found along the way that can share with me their experience, strength, and hope, and that give me another language to use to understand the captivity of my own life, and then begin to say, maybe I can't hear Jesus, I can hear them. If you want what we have, you'll do what we do, right? You begin to think, I want to be as free as those folks. Well, how did you get that free? Then do what we do. And it's this collection of relationships that then are there. And I think that's what the church offers, is these border-crossing relationships that cross all, like you're talking about, political divides, ideological divides. And we have learned how to be free in the middle of it, because that at the core of us is a love for each other that transcends everything else.
Yes, so we talked about in Matthew 26 and Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane where he's alone. He turns his attention. This is what freedom is. In this moment where if anyone had the kind of freedom that we should aspire to, it would be Jesus in this moment, is that he turns his attention so totally to God that he can lay out honestly all of his own human desires.
Yeah.
Scripture says he was deeply grieved and agitated.
Yeah.
In that moment, and he can do it without any fear of divine retribution from God.
Yeah.
And in that struggle that's before him, he lays it out, his own hopes for the situation, and then amidst the struggle, he recognizes God's desire is other than his own desire. And he defers to his Father. And that's what we see in that scene. And to me, I'm like, that's what we want to teach people to aspire to. And I think the discouraging thing for me as a pastor is that's the Scripture. That's the story. And I just don't know that I see a lot of Christians wanting to embrace that.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm going to talk about this week that I think is actually somewhat troubling is when you think about the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, and Jesus says, you've heard it said, do this, but it's just love your friends, but hate your enemies. But I'm going to give you a new way.
Yeah.
It was very radical. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And I think what I'm finding, and this is what I'm going to talk about this week, is this difficulty of Jesus' teachings. Look at all the ways that Christians are resisting the words of Jesus. And it's a sign of how deeply we've fallen captive into these norms and assumptions of the culture surrounding us. And so we say, Jesus' words really aren't that realistic for the world we live in. I mean, it's a totally different world now. Jesus would understand. He probably wouldn't be that harsh. It's much harder today than it was in Jesus' day.
He did not have to go through what I'm going through in this culture.
Yeah, they only hunted down the Christians and killed them, threw them into the lions and the gladiators. Yeah, so it's much harder today because you had to wait in a socially distanced line to get your Starbucks latte instead of not being socially distanced. Right. So much harder today. And then other people say, we're human. We can't, this is Jesus. We can't do what Jesus is asking.
Right.
We can't imitate God. We're really not capable. So therefore, we shouldn't be held to that standard, is another one. And then some people say, that's a spiritual ideal to aspire to. Mm-hmm. And then the last one is just like, I think Jesus gets all that. It's not easy. It's not popular, but it's rooted in the goodness of God, not in your goodness.
Yeah.
And until the church, when we talk about all this conversation of the church, what is the church going to look like going forward coming out of the pandemic? And I over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have some good conversations, I think, with some great guests that are coming to be with us that really are going to be wrestling with the same things. What's the church going to look like on the other side of this? Right. Because we were already in a massive paradigm shift already.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people that are not going to come back after the pandemic. Or if they come back, it'll be in a very different way. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder how the church is going to have to return to maybe a much different way of thinking about what we do. Yeah. So next week, Adam Hamilton from Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City, outside of Kansas City, and then Bishop Cynthia Harvey, who's now the president of the Council of Bishops for United Methodist Church. And, we've got our own problems in the Methodist Church, but just to think about what's the church going to look like as we go forward into the future? And so, I don't know.
Can I say this? Yeah. The things that you were talking about just a bit ago in terms of like all these reasons that we really can't follow Jesus seem to me like just another way of doing captivity management. Right? I'm trying to manage my own captivity by saying why I'm like this and why I can't be free, right? And so that's one of the things I think that I'm loving the discussions we're having at Chapelwood that you're leading us in, which is there's a way forward, and it's going to be brought about by the Spirit of God, by poets, by different language, by love, by a desire to see something different. And we have to let these things go that don't work anyway. We have to let these things go that are not serving us, and to be able to paint that picture of what's ahead of us. To be able to say, I want to move forward with Jesus. Jesus is ahead of us. We can't. Is it going to be rough? Heck yeah, it's going to be rough. Is it going to be awesome? Yes, because Jesus is ahead of us. We're going to be okay.
And my hope is really more determination. I have a sense of hopefulness, but I think my attitude is more, staying focused on the path. Just working the patch, working the patch. So what do you call that? Right. Duty?
Perseverance.
Perseverance, right?
Yeah.
Because honestly, sometimes the hope is not real strong. Because when we're talking about go back to all we've talked about, captivity, change management, all that sort of stuff. I'm listening to people who don't want to change. Even good Christian people. It's like, when are we going back to the schedule like before? I was like, we can't even fill up 2 services. We're not even close yet. So we're not going to think about turning on a 3rd service yet. Yeah. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's going to be really hard because people want to go back to what was comfortable and what was what made them feel settled and safe and secure. And that's the hard part. That's what church does. What any communal group does for you is it gives you some sense of security.
Right.
But there is a season that you have to go through sometimes to move from one space to another, where that communal life is going to be very risky and difficult and dangerous, but you do it together. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And that's what I get excited about, is out of this, our new relationship's going to form. Will Chapelwood emerge as this kind of this place? It's almost like a dojo, right? So most places you go to learn, you sit in a seat and you look at somebody that is the instructor. In a karate studio, dojo, you have to actually practice what you were being taught, right? It has to be embodied. And I've always seen Chapelwood more as a dojo than a classroom, right? Where we're trying to fill up our heads. No, we're needing to coordinate these new activities in our bodies and with each other in the world, whether that's at the food pantry or TRT or our youth groups or whatever's going on, right? We're coordinating these activities in the world. And I think I get excited about that.
Hey, so did you watch the Oprah Winfrey interview with Harry and Meghan?
I only saw clips of it.
I watched it.
What do you think?
I don't really care.
Okay.
I mean,
I don't really care.
I just love I just love how there's all this buildup. It's like Harry and Meghan will be interviewed by Oprah. What will the Queen say? What will Charles do?
Who cares?
And I watched it, and of course, my whole experience for the first thing is like, for the first while, it's like, when's Harry showing up?
Yeah.
It was like a whole hour of Meghan, which is no problem. She was great, but I'm like, I thought it was going to be them together. And then it's like they got, they live in this really nice neighborhood in California, and they got a chicken coop in the backyard. And I thought, that's good.
That's good.
He's farming chickens. But I mean, like, there were some things on there that were kind of disturbing, this and that. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I'm looking at these folks and I'm going, I can't relate to this.
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't be dismissive of her experience or his. I mean, can you imagine your whole life being, I used to think that'd be really cool to like be the prince who's going to be the king, but I don't know. That doesn't look too good.
No.
Captivity.
Yeah. So would you think the king would be the most free, or the queen would be the most free person of all? And according to listening to all this, you're like, I don't think you have any freedom. They took her passport and her keys and everything.
Really?
She couldn't go anywhere.
Passport?
Yes.
I'd be telling them I lost it. That'd be deep somewhere.
You are the princess, but you cannot have lunch with your friends. I said, or what she said is like, they told her that it's like, you need to calm down. You're in the press too much. She goes, I've been out twice in the past 6 months out of this house. Like, I'm not sure how you win that battle.
I'd burn that thing down probably.
Yeah. Plus, she went from being a celebrity to that. So it's probably a tough switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he was a celebrity too, probably. I mean,
he grew up in that, didn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
I don't get it.
I don't either.
Monarchy. I find a hard time to relate to the kings and the queens.
Really?
Yeah, I'm more of a day laborer kind of guy. I get that.
It's weird being like when living there and like there's plates and mugs and people go off on that stuff.
Oh, that's right. You live there.
I didn't get it either because it's like they're not elected. They are stayed. They are affixed like furniture.
But they love them over there, don't they?
Oh yeah, we were there for the Queen's birthday at some point, and all of London just went nuts and threw this massive party, and it's just I think I forget what was it, or something Jubilee. So.
What was it somebody put on Twitter? He goes, America once again slowly taking down the monarchy. And ever since George III, it said, we play the long game, baby. We play the long game. All right, well, next week we got Adam Hamilton. I'm excited about that. He's a friend, and we're going to talk about, I really want to talk about ministry during this season and coming out of this and what it looks like to be the church. Church of the Resurrection is the largest United Methodist congregation in the United States and has been one of the fastest growing one for many years. But they've always had this very distinct mission and focus of reaching unchurched people.
That's right.
And that's been a big key for their evangelistic growth. So I'm excited to talk to Adam about that and a lot of other things. We'll talk about Methodist Church and other stuff, but really what does the future of the church look like? I think it will be a great discussion. So it'll be good. Well, I'm John Stevens.
And I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.